Good
Brother,
evening,
take it
everybody.
away.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to start off saying that I'm honored and humbled to be asked to give this presentation. You have to forgive my attire and appearance. I just came back from the bee yards. That's why I was late logging on. So I'm still suited up. I don't know if you can see that in the image or not, but without further ado, we will get started. So I need to share my screen, correct? And we'll go with...
Right, you should have permissions to do that. You are coming
James,
through
do
a
you see that?
little robot. Yes, I see that. You are a little robot-like. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that. Sounds a little compressed.
I may possibly turn off my video. Would that help? That'd be...
It might.
Does
I'm
that
not
sound
sure if
better?
it would in your situation.
Does that sound
You're
better,
good right
James?
now. You do
Okay.
sound
And you
good
can
right now,
see,
brother.
and you can see the presentation, correct?
Yes, I can see the first slide.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is John Clark, Past Master Converse 601, 601. I live in the big town of Swayze, Indiana. If anybody has ever heard of Swayze or been through Swayze, but besides all my other jobs and professions, I am a beekeeper. I've been a beekeeper now for approximately 14 years. We do a lot of different work besides just making honey. A lot of hard effort goes into there. We do swarm removals. So there you can see a bee swarm in that small bush. That was one of the easiest swarm removals I've ever done. Sometimes we get called out by industries, companies where they have swarms on their gates, fences. Sometimes we will engage in cutouts. So this is a cutout from a live tree that you see on the left that we did last spring. And that colony is still surviving well. And on the right, you can see a cutout that we were doing from somebody's attic over their garage. We're actually having to do a bee vac. We suck the bees out through a vacuum and they go into the hive that way. Of course, we do engage in honey sales. There's my wife and oldest daughter there to the left, and you can see some of our product to the right. My youngest son there on the left is helping with the extraction of the honey. Again, an awful lot of work goes into getting the honey. It's not just simply turning on a tap and expecting to get a large quantity of honey. You actually have to go into the hive. You have to work the hive is what we call it. And there on the right is my mentor that was showing me initially how he extracts the honey. And so he was teaching me and my son in terms of how the best way to go about that. I do have a fledgling YouTube page, which YouTube will come up here in another conversation, which I hope you will all enjoy. But that's kind of was the impetus of this presentation. So if you just type in Clark's Bees, you'll come into my channel, and a lot of those are just, some of them shorter videos, some of them longer videos, but they all center around my passion for bees. And so without further ado, I'm going to give you a little bee trivia here. You can see some of the answers up top, but I think it's important to know a little bit about bees. They are one of the most fascinating creatures that I think God created. It's an unbelievable species. Did you know that a bee can fly around 15 miles per hour? Bees fly 55,000 miles to bring us 1 pound of honey. During her life, a single bee will gather about 1/12 of 1 teaspoon of honey. Bees must go to 2 million flowers in order to get 1 pound of honey. Bees stroke their wings 11,400 times per minute. And it takes approximately 3,500 bees weigh 1 pound. So when we talk about a pound of bees, that's about 3,500 bees in a single pound. Honey bees make up 80% of all pollinators. So you've all probably heard by now we have a pollination crisis in the United States. Everybody wants to save the honeybee, actually worldwide. But honeybees make up about 80% of all pollinators. There are other pollinators out there, but honeybees do 80% of that work. The queen honeybee, and we'll talk about her in a second, lays around 1,500 eggs per day. And as far as I know, and the only thing I could ever tell, the honeybee, excuse me, is the only insect that produces food eaten by man. Now, I understand that there are insects that we will consume as humans, but they're the only insect that actually produces a food product that is consumed by man. A queen, when she goes out on her mating flight, she will mate up with up to 17 different drones on a 2-day period, 1 to 2 days of mating, and then she'll fly back into that hive. And typically, unless they swarm, she will remain in that hive the rest of her life, laying those 1,500 eggs that we already discussed. So, what are the different types of bees that we have? Honeybees. Who lives in a honeybee hive? Well, you've got really 3 different types. You've got worker bees, you have drones, and you have the queen bee. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, there's one queen bee per hive. Now you can have many worker bees, and you can have many drones. The drones are the males. The worker bees are all female. And drones, just so you're aware, do not have a stinger. So if you see a big fat honeybee, it's probably a drone. And if so, that means you can pick that drone up and let them crawl all over you. There's no reason to be afraid. They have no stinger. Here's a little better image. The way to tell the difference between the queen and the worker bees, the queen will have an elongated body. So you can see her in the middle. She's got that elongated abdomen. That's where all the eggs are, where she's laying her eggs. The worker bees are smaller than the queen. So easy to tell the difference between those two. And the drones are just larger, fatter bees. So that's pretty easy to identify the drones as well. Bees make up what's called a colony. Now, what you see here, this is a differentiation in terms. What you see here are the hive boxes. The hive is the building where the colony lives. The hive could be a tree. The hive could be an attic. But the colony lives in a hive. The hive is a physical structure. The colony are the group of bees that reside in that structure. Worker honeybees will have different jobs according to their age. Now, the drones, their sole job is to mate the queen. Once the drones mate the queen, they actually die during that process. So we won't go into details there, but just so you know, once the drone breeds the queen, mates the queen, the drone dies. So you have remaining, then you have the queen bee and the worker bees. Queen bee, from day one, after she gets mated, she has her job to do, and her job's to lay eggs. The worker bees will all have different jobs according to their age. So from days 1 to 2, they have the job to clean the cells, and they start with the ones they were born in. And they also keep the other brood warm, the other eggs, the other larvae, they keep them warm. Days 3 to 5, their job is to feed older larvae. They're kind of nurse bees, we call them. From 6 to 11, they have the responsibility to feed the youngest larvae. Days 12 through 17, they're producing wax, they're carrying food, they're building combs, and they have undertaker duties. So as the older bees, which in the summertime would be about 40 or 45 days, as those bees die, these undertaker bees then help carry out the remains of those bees and keep the hive clean. Days 18 to 21, they're protecting the hive entrance. They have guard duty. And from days 22 to the end of their life, they will fly from the hive and collect pollen, nectar, water. Some of those bees may become what we call robber bees, where they're actually going into other hives and stealing the honey that they've already collected, or the pollen, the nectar that they've already collected. But I got to thinking about this. Worker bees have various jobs based on their age and based on their maturity, based on their experience. And I thought about that for a second. I thought, how do we compare that with our lodges? Well, typically, you go through the process of EA, FC, and Master Mason, of course, but most people don't start out. Excuse me. Excuse me. Most Masons don't start out in a role of secretary or treasurer. You work up there. You may start out in guard duty as a tiler, and then you advance from there, or a steward or a deacon. But you usually don't just go through your Master Mason degree, and the next thing you know, you're the worshipful master. There's a progress there. You're a chain where you go up in stage, you go up in maturity, you go up in knowledge and wisdom, and eventually you take on greater and greater roles in your lodge. But the lodge itself operates very similar in nature to a colony. Now, when we talk about the colony of bees, Somebody gave me this illustration once upon a time, and I found it fascinating and very true. The colony, when we talk about a colony of bees, we can't think of bees as individuals. I'm a person, you're a person. And so we naturally think that that's a bee, that's a bee. That's not how bees think. A bee would consider themselves part of a cell, part of one organism, one group. Now, some cells are healthy, some can be diseased. Some bees are at the end of their life, and some bees are at the start of their life, but they all operate and function as one unit. They're part of one living, breathing organism. The lodge, by the way, used to be called in antiquity, days gone by, the hive of Freemasons. So we shouldn't think of Masons as individuals. I'm a brother, you're a brother. Okay, we're all brothers of one lodge. Some brothers are healthy, some brothers can be diseased. Some brothers have the capacity, as John said, to memorize the catechism. Some brothers don't have that capacity, but we're all part of one living, breathing organism, the lodge. And I think that's one of the reasons why in days of antiquity, we were called a hive of Freemasons before the lodge term was regularly utilized. The hive has always been, as far as I can tell, a symbol of Freemasonry. Many of you will recognize that gentleman there on the right. If you look closely at George Washington's apron that was created for him by Madame de Lafayette, you'll notice the beehive at the very top of the apron on the left. Now, the hive that you see there is not the hive that's typically used by most American beekeepers today. We typically will use what's called the Langstroth hive, but the hive that's usually associated with Freemasonry is the skep, and the skep is a little bit clearer on the next image. What I did is just try to go through and find Masonic beehive emblems, symbols that we've utilized. It's very easily to see there on the left, you have the skep. That's the traditional hive that people used dating back to certainly King Solomon's temple, if not before. That's the skep. You see another image there on the right. A few more images that I pulled off. You get the skep there, several Masonic symbols. Even in stained glass, it would appear. I believe that was the chapel over in Scotland that we see there on the right. And back in 2019 and 2020, the Grand Master of Mississippi, that was his pen. He had the skep on it as well. So the beehive pops up routinely as we look through our history of Masonry. In the early 19th century lecture, the master's degree, they said this: the beehive is an emblem of industry and recommends the practice of that virtue to all created beings, from the highest seraph in the heavens to the lowest reptile of the dust. It teaches us that as we come into the world rational and intelligent beings, so we should ever be industrious ones, never sitting down contented while our fellow creatures around us are in want, especially when it is in our power to relieve them without inconvenience to ourselves. I don't know when the beehive was first mentioned, but we do know there's an expose printed in Ireland dating 1724, where they're already using the beehive as a symbol of Masonry. As Masons, we must imitate the bee, be industrious, work with others and for others, take pride in our vocations, obey the rules of our society, and strive to add to our body of knowledge and understanding. Otherwise, we are simply useless members of society. Now, I wanted to bring back YouTube for a second. For the last 3-4 years, at night when I have some time to kill, I'll usually go down to the basement. I'll watch some videos, typically about beekeeping and learning more. Well, there was a gentleman out in the East Coast that had a very nice teaching style. I kind of enjoyed his teaching style. I was watching him go through his hives, and he's doing some hive inspections that you get in there and work in your hives. And I realized he was wearing a ring. So I looked him up on Facebook, shot him a text and said, "Hey, are you a traveling man?" And he said, "Yes, I am." We got a nice little conversation going. And I told him I was doing the Masonic education for our lodge, and he sent me what he came up with. So Brother Jason Crook from Union Lodge number 5, Middleton, Delaware. I don't want to, I want to make sure he gets full credit for this. He came up with the working tools of a beekeeper, which are very accurate. You have the beehive, which you can see on the left. You've got the hive tool, which is that tool that you see on the right. It's kind of like a smaller size pry bar. That's what you use to lift boxes up to pull frames out of the hive. And you have the smoker. Now, most of you probably have seen a smoker before, but in the bottom right-hand corner, if you're unfamiliar with what the smokers are, you load those up with, pine needles. You could use anything else, sawdust, whatever, to produce a large amount of smoke. And you will typically blow that smoke. And that smoke, contrary to popular belief, it doesn't calm the bees down. The smoke doesn't calm them down. What the smoke does is cover up other pheromones the bees will release. So if the colony is under attack, if the colony thinks they're under attack, they will go out and start trying to sting you. If a honeybee stings you, the honeybee dies. The honeybee is not like a hornet or yellow jacket that likes to sting you for the fun of it. If a honeybee will only sting you if they feel like they're threatened or under attack. So what that smoke does, it covers up those pheromones. It covers up those pheromones so that they don't know that there should be take an aggressive stance. Lots of times it may make the bees believe they're on fire. And so a lot of the bees at that point in time will go to their honey stores immediately and start sucking down nectar, which does in fact calm them down. It gives them kind of like a sugar rush. But that's the purpose of the smoker. So if you go into a hive inspection and the bees are overly aggressive, you give them a few shots of smoke, cover up those pheromones, and it may relax them or may force them to take some honey. But the smoke itself doesn't calm them down. So in Freemasonry, the beehive represents all that is proper in society. Again, this goes back to brother Jason Crook here. The beehive represents all that is proper in society and could arguably be the organization's most enduring symbol. Many know what a beehive is, but a bee skep is a symbol that's used in our third degree. The skep is the oldest, truest form of the craft of beekeeping. It's the tool used by beekeepers to contain their bee stock in an early form to transport them to pollinate crops. Its very design is industrious, but it houses a colony of such complexity that unless one knocks on the skep, one can never know the complex work that's being performed within. So these are the tools of a beekeeper: the beehive, the hive tool, and the smoker, and are thus explained. The smoker helps cloud the defense pheromones of the bee to allow the keeper to work with them safely. The hive tool is used to surgically disassemble a hive to inspect it, and the beehive is the place where we keep bees. But as a Masonic beekeeper, we realize these tools are what operative beekeepers use, but we as Masonic beekeepers are taught to look at these tools for more noble and glorious purposes. The smoker clouds the judgment of the bees, teaching us that if we allow the world to cloud our judgment, we will become complacent in our labors to fail to protect our colony and the secrets of masonry. The hive tool, to use the working tools of the craft to help assist in our daily tasks as we inspect life's beehives, and the beehive as that emblem of industry, where we recognize that sweet rewards are not just a necessity for survival, but to build strong colonies. Here's a frame of bees that we had during a hive inspection. That's what frames look like inside those hive boxes. Didn't know if you saw those before or not, but that's what a frame of bees looks like. I've included our contact information if anybody is in the Swayze area or would like to take a look at our YouTube channel. But bees are a fascinating creature, and they surely are industrious. And I certainly understand why the Masons of antiquity utilized the bee and the beehive as such important Masonic symbols. So that being said, James, I'll turn it back over to you. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer some.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, worshipful brother. And brothers, if you do have questions, you can pop them in the chat. I see Grant K. Smith does have a question. He says, you mentioned undertaker duties. What do bees do with their dead? Do they have a funeral ritual?
To my knowledge, there are no funeral rituals. They just basically toss them out of the hive to keep the hive as clean as they possibly can keep it. So bees are very neat and tidy. If we put something in the hive that shouldn't be there, If it's within their power and ability, they will work collectively to drag that item out of the hive and just toss it out the front door. That's generally what the undertakers will do.
I don't see any more questions yet, but if you do have a question and can unmute in a mannerly order, we'll take questions that way as well. I will say, while we're waiting on any potential questions, I really identified strongly with one of the earlier portions of what you said, John. I equated it to the lodge being the group of Masons and the building we meet in, the lodge building, being our temple. But when we talk about a lodge, we're talking about the brothers of the lodge. You know, a lodge is a group
Correct.
of people, not a building. And actually, I think that kind of ties in with Right Worshipful Brother Seipel's talk earlier, where, and you could probably equate this to bees better than I could, but, you know, hives do relocate from time to time. It's not an uncommon thing at all. And they do it for various reasons. And the Lodge in the Box program, which I'm sorry, John, you weren't on yet for that, but Brother Seipel talked about how if the climate of your lodge is not ideal, you can essentially meet somewhere else for various reasons. And he's assembled an altar that stores all the things you would need for a lodge. And so I just wanted to make that correlation.
That's a very good correlation. Typically, bees will leave the hive for a few different reasons. When they swarm, typically when they swarm, it is because they've grown too large for their hive. So if you think back in 1700s, 1800s, how the lodges continued to grow and continue to expand westward in the United States, because we were growing as a movement. We were growing, and new lodges had to be opened because, well, we had to swarm. We were too large in our hive box, so we had to create new lodges. Sometimes if things are really bad and just not going well at all, bees will abscond. They will simply just take off. And that's not a swarming sensation. That's not because they've grown too large. It's because there's something wrong. And I think maybe that's another example of maybe sometimes we have lodges today that, we have to just close down for whatever reason, or maybe look at a different type of box to go to. I think that's a brilliant idea. One thing I do want to mention, I would be amiss if I didn't mention this: beekeeping in masonry. As a beekeeper, people think, John, you're kind of nuts. Why in the world would you want to go out there and play with those bees? Well, from a personal perspective, I go out and play with the bees because when I'm doing that, nobody's calling me, nobody's texting me, nobody's Teams chatting me, nobody's, it's a stress reliever for me. But one thing I love about beekeeping, just like with brother Jason Crook we mentioned here a minute ago, beekeeping is very Masonic oriented. To date, I have yet to find a beekeeper that wouldn't take time out of his day to talk to me, to help me, to mentor me, to let me grow in my beekeeping skills and in craft. And same thing in masonry. If we want to grow in masonry, there's always somebody out there willing to work with us. And this is a perfect example of a case in that nature. We want to share our knowledge. We want to share our wisdom. We want to see others grow. We want to grow ourselves. You never know all there is to know about beekeeping. And I don't think you'll ever know all there is to know about masonry.
Well, thank you very much. I did have a question, actually. You showed a slide at the end. I think it was one of Brother Cook's slides, where you had the hives on the left-hand side, and they were all painted different colors. And I seem to recall that wasps and bees and various types of hornets are very visual. Are they color coded so that the individual hives can tell them apart, or is that a wrong guess?
Well, no, not at all. So a lot of beekeepers will paint their hives whatever cheap paint they can get their hands on. But bees see in ultraviolet light, so they see in a different spectrum than we do. Most beekeepers, you go with a standard white because it's just easy for the bees to see. It's easy to maintain. It keeps the hive cooler in the summer, and overheating, especially down south, is a major concern. You would never want to paint your beehives black or a really dark color, but some people will vary boxes with different ultraviolet light schemes, light purple or violet. Bees do like those colors. So you may see a couple supers, painted, yellow or light blue or violet. That's not uncommon.